something happens that involves me, and I'll shut that off for now then.
Perfect. Yeah, you can mute your mic. Thank you, Gary. All right, folks, welcome. This is Luke Gran. Thank you, Gary. This is Luke Gran from Practical Farmers of Iowa. Thank you for joining us. I just wanted to say a few words before we begin. Good afternoon, and welcome to this special PFI Farminar, which is what we call our webinar series. I'm Luke Gran. I'm the host of this series and staff member of Practical Farmers. What a spring and summer we've had this year. Challenging weather scenarios again inspire farmers to innovate and get creative. As many folks remember, the spring was just terrible. It seemed like 2 weeks of solid rain in parts of Iowa, and then it dried out terribly in many parts of the state in the summertime. Very special welcome to many folks who may have not participated in any of our Farminars before. Folks from the Iowa Certified Crop Advisors group. Great folks. We want to definitely reach out to you and encourage you all to get more involved in Practical Farmers of Iowa Farminars as your time is available. And just let you know, you get 1.5 credits for attending this Farminar. We'll give you some more information in a little bit about how to make sure you get credit for attending this seminar. In the next 90 minutes, you're going to get great information from two farmers with experience growing and managing large grains with cover crops, and even a research agronomist with decades of experience analyzing which cover crop seeds perform for Iowa and how the practice impacts soil health. We hope you will leave this online seminar with more ideas and a better feel for options that are available to you with cover crops. But first, I'd like to make you aware of some great opportunities with our organization, Practical Farmers of Iowa. We've got a wonderful membership organization of 2,200 folks now, and we want you to join as well if you're not yet a member. Just $20 for students each year, $50 for the whole farm. And that includes a bunch of great benefits, including discounts to our annual conference, which is up in January 23rd through the 25th in Ames, Iowa. And also want you to feel free to attend many of our free events. But before we talk about the events, I wanted to let you know that if you are one of those folks that are interested in adding cover crops to your systems, and you want to talk to someone that's been there, tried them out before, a really great benefit of our membership includes access to this PFI Cover Crops email discussion group. So you could just shoot an email real quick if you're a member of Practical Farmers and you're on this email discussion group. You can talk with hundreds of farmers across the state that are, following some of those same challenges that you're into and want to help share what they've learned in the process. So please consider that as an option. If you're already a member, just call Lauren at our office, the number on the screen, and you can be added to that member-only email discussion group. Some great events have been held already on cover crops. This spring we had over 1,600 farmers attend, and we've got even more scheduled for this fall. If you're interested in attending an on-farm cover crop event, please just contact our cover crop coordinator, Sarah, at practicalfarmers.org for more information about those events, or check out our website, practicalfarmers.org. Our agenda tonight is as follows. We're going to have two farmers at first, and then Tom Casper from the National Laboratory for Agriculture and the Environment. And we'll have 20 minutes at the end for your questions and answers. So feel free to use that chat box to put your questions in throughout, and we'll make sure to have time at the end for all of your questions. And before we go to the farmers, just a quick note about how to access the CCA credits. Jim Frederick wanted to be here today but wasn't able to join us, so he wanted me to just share a couple slides that he prepared. Great group here, Iowa Certified Crop Advisors. There's their number on their screen and their website. There's opportunity for anybody who attends this today or watches the recording by the 5 o'clock on the September 27th. They are allowed to get 1.5 credit hours for soil and water for free, no charge. Just sign in with your name and number, and if you didn't sign in with that already, just stick it in the chat box, name and CCA number. Please provide feedback on how this went. Practical Farmers of Iowa will be sending out an email evaluation, so you can make sure to share pluses and minuses, good things and challenges that remain to make these a really great tool for you to improve your knowledge. And if you want to just shoot an email to Joan, she will take care of getting you the CCA credit. But make sure to if you're watching this as an archived recording, you got to have it viewed by 5 o'clock and send an email to Joan to get the free credit. Just wanted to say to always check with your local NRCS. We've got an NRCS person on the Farminar today, and if you have questions regarding NRCS, we'll bring them in at the end of the seminar. and your insurance provider, input suppliers, and check about product availability. I'm sure there's a lot of farmers out there that talked about not even being able to get some seed at some parts of the go this year, waiting for that new crop to come in July. Some other information is available at this website, the Certified Crop Advisor website, as well as Practical Farmers of Iowa, some great events you can attend, and some really great research, too, that pulls together a lot of different experiments. And also these great resources can help you as you're exploring additional cover crop topics in your farm. These two publications are really useful if you're interested in adding a couple to your bookshelf. Some information on the screen. You can follow, take a look at these two publications. And there is definitely a great conference coming up February 11th and 12th, the Agribusiness Showcase and Conference here. And there's the information on the website. That's all I have. And, oh yeah, definitely want to encourage folks to remember to put in your viewer count numbers there on the screen. We've got 3 here. And let's begin with our first farmer. Bob's sitting right next to me. I'm going to pull up your slides. Bob Lynch from Gilmore City.
Yes, thank you. Just going to start off here. This is a family operation up in north central Iowa. This is my family, my wife in front of me. I'm in the back. My son, my oldest son, and my grandson. We went down to the Iowa State Fair, and we were privileged to be one of 60-some people families that were the Iowa Farm Environmental Leadership. This is the second year for that, and so just thought that it was a nice picture that way. I talked to Sarah early on in the season. This is probably the 15th, 20th of May, wondering if this ground would actually grow something or not, that we had chemicals put out there. We had some Harness Extra put out there, and that extra is the Atrazine out there. You're looking at radishes right here. I had some peas on the right, and I had some rye on the left side over here, and it all did come up. Eventually, though, the radishes got up to be about 2 inches tall, and basically the chemicals started killing them off. So I was just seeing what would actually happen to some of these stuff, and they did grow. But this is what we put on some of our preventive planting. We went out there the 14th of August. This is a picture of basically oats, the radish, and some clover mixture. We drilled it in the ground. Just showing you the size. I took this picture 2 days ago, so it's not that old. So you can see the size is pretty good size, and it's working pretty good. Just a crossways look at it just to see the difference, but they're growing pretty good size. Some of the reasons I did decide to go with the cover crop is because I did have prevented planted acres, and this is something I hope that nobody ever has to have ever again, is prevented planted acres, but that's what happened. This picture right here is a picture of a new tile line. This is part of a project to close 12 drainage wells up in our area. And this is what they cut through this year to put the tile on the ground, and instead of leaving the ground bare, I decided it probably looked better to have some type of a cover crop put back on, and it grew really nice out here. The actual date was this is the 14th, 15th of August when I put this out there. This right here at home probably got about 1 inch of rain one time after the fact. A couple other pictures of some prevented planting. This is the seed corn headland. This is just showing you that I didn't want to leave it bare, and so I put it out there just to start growing, but you can see where it was packed down a little bit. It didn't come the best out here, but it did work. And they picked the corn the other day, and that hopefully it'll come back up. The rest of the field, I had cereal rye flowing off the airplane. This is another field of our prevent planted where we just actually went out and put the oats and the same mixture out there the 14th. It didn't have quite as much rain down this field that we had, but it is coming now a little bit better. The next one's just another picture of it. I think the next one coming up here is a picture. If you notice in the middle how if there's nothing growing in there, well, when we were out there burning down for the corn ground, we went out there with our sprayer and we sprayed chemicals, and that's where you start your boom or you had an overdose of chemicals, and so it didn't grow where we had extra chemicals out there, but the majority of the field did grow that way. This is another view of another field I have. It's not quite as nice as the others, but this field probably hasn't had a ½ inch of rain all summer on it, and so it's just it's surprising that the radishes came up so easy compared to everything else. They must like the dry weather a little better. A neighbor of mine put rye out there. He went out there about the first part of July and put rye on a lot of his acres out there. And then he sprayed like 2,4-D to kill some of the weeds. And I see the other day he was out here terminating it already, which kind of made me sad. He's already spraying the 2,4-D and the Roundup out here trying to make it black already. And I stopped and talked to him, and I was hoping he would leave it till next spring. But he's not going to do that. So this is what happens. Just another picture of the same field. You can see the volunteer corn that came up that didn't die. So this is another neighbor down the road. He went out the end of July, and I don't know exact date, but the last week of July, he used a 15-inch row John Deere planter, but it's not really a planter. It's a single disc with a wheel beside it, and he planted in 15-inch rows. This is wheat and radishes planted in this field. You can see that even that early planting date, he really didn't have a whole lot of radishes that bolted. You can see the flowers there a little bit where they did bolt, you know, but there isn't really a lot of them. And I was surprised because I was always told you should wait till after, you know, first part or middle part of August to plant the radish, and that's why I waited, I guess. So just another view of it. This is the gentleman, Mark Cordy is his name. He just reached down and we grabbed one out of the ground. And we were surprised how big it was. And this broke off in the ground. And that, you can see that's probably, you wrap your fingers around it, and that's about all you could do. So that's like a 2-inch diameter, 1.5-inch diameter, something like that, and already probably 8 to 10 inches deep. So this is how we planted it. There's your 15-inch rows. He is a strip-till person, a no-till person like myself. He's hoping that when this all dies down this winter that he'll come back in and plant basically with his 30-inch row planter in between these rows and just leave these rows undisturbed, so that he really doesn't have to worry about having to plant through the holes from the radishes or anything like that. And that's kind of what his goal is. This is a part of another field. A lot of people in our area put soybeans out there. They just use the soybeans that were treated. They put these out there. This happens to be one where he just put the beans out there because he couldn't plant the corn. And the next picture goes on and shows you where he wanted to try that same drill. And so we took that drill out there and put rye out there in that drill and planted the rye in 15-inch rows just to see how that would work out there in the prevent planted also. You can still see the corn stalks standing out there where he would have probably planted his corn into standing corn stalks for the corn on corn. Just another view of that same thing. We will have weed issues in the future. There's no doubt about it. We already have those issues. We're going to have more in the future, it looks like. Some of the other things that the farmers in our area are doing is pattern tiling. That's very popular in our area. If they didn't get her planted this year, they're pattern tiling 100% of their farm that isn't done. And so this is just down the road a little bit farther from that last gentleman, and he's just showing you that they did continue to pattern tile, and so they hopefully never have this issue with wet ground again. So this is what they're doing. This is the sad note. This is that same farmer I took a picture earlier of the annual rye or ciliar rye. He's out there with his big offset disc already tearing it up. I don't understand the reason. I tried to convince him to leave it till spring, but this is what he's doing. And so he's trying to get his fall tillage work, I guess, done. He's got 800 to 900 acres of this. He's probably going to work up now before he starts combining a few beans. So,
did he tell you why he wanted to turn it black and not let it go all winter?
This gentleman is a conventional farmer to begin with, and I don't think he feels comfortable with leaving it out there. He usually makes everything as black as can be, and I think that's probably the reason why he's doing it. No, he really didn't explain himself other than I'm doing it, you know. So this is a picture that I'm borrowing from Tim Smith up at Eagle Grove. This was in the March of 2012. I just wanted to show people that, you know, this is what his cereal rye looked like in the spring, and that some people are trying to determine how much residue they'll have in the spring to plant into, and I just wanted to show you some of the examples of this, what it looks like. This is early March. The next picture here, this is the end of March, 1st of April, and it looks like it's a pretty good cover out there, and you're going, wow, what's going to happen here? And the next one is 10 days after he sprayed it with the Roundup to terminate this, and now is it going to die or not? And 14 days later, he's planting this field, and you look, that same field is hardly anything left on top of the ground. What are you talking? Maybe, less than a third, fourth of it actually out there. So it looks like there's a lot of volume out there, and there isn't. And so I guess that's what my concern is, that a lot of these people that look at, like that one gentleman's going to leave his radishes and weed out there and plant into it next year. I told him time he gets there next spring, there probably won't be a fourth of what you see today, and it won't have any problem for him. So that's my concern, that people see so much green right now, they will probably try and make it black by next spring, and that's not really what we want to do. So, and I'm no expert at this. This is my first or second year working with cover crops. I'm a strip till no-tiller. And so it's just what I have seen in my area, and hope we never have the prevent plan again in our area. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So that's about it. I think that was my last slide. I think so.
Cool. Are there any questions for Bob at this time? Clarifications on his experiences this summer? I bet there's lots of questions. We'll give you a few seconds to. All right, there we go.
Yeah, you could probably plant beans into live cover. I try to usually, especially beans into, your rye or something like that, would probably work okay. You're still going to have to terminate it like that. But everyone's going to have a little bit different opinion, and every year is going to be a little bit different as far as how it does work. But it's one of those things you have to learn and experiment with, and I guess that's what we're doing. The other one is, what's your experience of flying radishes on? I just did this year. I did that seed corn field at home right there where I lived. We put the cereal rye, radish, and clover mixture out there over the top. I was fortunate. I got about a half-inch of rain here the last couple days. So hopefully that starts to grow. I know some of my neighbors have done that last year, and sometimes they grow pretty good, and sometimes they just lay there and start growing in the spring. So prevent planting, what does that mean? Is one of the questions here. There comes a point in time when you have your crop insurance, and there's a deadline where you can say, do I need to plant or do I want to plant? And it comes to the point of time where June 1 came around, and some people you can take the choice and say, no, I don't want to plant, and just not plant corn. If you had, say, for instance, had corn going out there, and then they give you 60% of your guaranteed income. So whatever level you were insured at, if you were 80% insured, well then 80% times your yield times your price gave you so many dollars guaranteed, and 60% of that they will give you just for not planting corn and leaving it fallow or putting cover crops on, like what we did here. So the same was true with beans. Some people did not plant beans. It got so late into the season. But we ended up planting most of our beans the week of that 20th of June, just to get them in the ground, because we thought it was probably better to try and do that than try to take a preventive planting on beans. So if that doesn't quite do it, you can call or text me later on, and I can try and go prevent planting that more, or ask an agent, insurance agent. They can gladly do that for you. The reason why I waited on my preventive planting until August was talking to Sarah Carlson here one day, and she says if you go too soon with radishes out in your field, they'll have a good chance of bolting or making the flowers or blooms on top, and when they do that, they don't put roots down the ground. And the reason for my radishes, I wanted them to have them put a root in the ground so they break up the soil in the ground, and at the same time, that way they'll pick up some nutrients from the ground and hopefully save those nutrients for next year. And that was the reason why I waited till August. Looking at my neighbors planting the end of July, I should have gone out there and planted mine sooner, but I did not. Does prevent planting hurt your APH? That I don't know. I hope not. I hope it's just one of those years where they just cross off the line and don't even average that in, and it's just gone. I don't think. I know it doesn't, because I got the enterprise units. I got the whole farm enterprise units for the insurance, and I know those don't count toward the yield of those, so that's totally different. But I'm no expert on insurance, so that's something you need to ask an insurance agent.
What does APH stand for?
I drew a blank.
It's some sort of crop insurance.
Yeah,
thing.
It's
okay.
your approved history, or your approved
planting history,
yield history.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
All right.
There.
Cool. We'll bring Gary in.
Average production history. There you go. Thank you, somebody. Yeah. Yeah, you have a 10-year average production history, and you take that average for your insurance level. So
nice. Any other last-minute questions for Bob specifically on his experiences this summer? I kind of wonder if that guy that's disking in his cover crop is going to get fined or something. I mean, I hope he didn't, you know.
He's one of those that probably never took any money for EQIP or took any nutrient reduction strategy. Now, if you did take EQIP money or you did take nutrient reduction strategy through the new legislation through the state here, that has to stay till next spring. You cannot tear that up like that. So yeah, so he didn't probably take any money for that. So the rate that I put the oats out there just about a bushel to the acre for the oats, and I put out six pounds of the mixture of radish clover mixture, and I bought that from a company, Albert Lee Seed House, where I bought it from, and I just had them ship it to me, and we mixed it in. So that's what we did. You know, the question is, would you consider planting radishes at this point in time as part of your cover crop? Well, I did have mine flown on here the September 4th, and I just got a rain Monday or Tuesday, so I'm hoping that works. A gentleman in Pocahontas County did put radishes out last year after he combined his beans, and they got to be the size of your pinky finger or a little bit bigger diameter and went down on the ground. So they did do something for him. So depends on what you're looking for, I guess. Well, the question is here, you planted some oats the first part of September. At what stage of the oats planting should we work it up? Well, my answer would be don't work it up. Let it die this winter with the freeze and kill, and then plant into it next year would be my answer, because I'm a strip tiller and no-tiller, but that would be what I would do anyway.
Excellent. Well, I think we'll switch to the next farmer speaker, and just to remind you, we've got about 20 minutes with Mark Peterson from Stanton, Iowa, and then we'll go to Tom Casper for 20 minutes, and then we'll have 20 minutes for questions from everybody for the remainder of the 90 minutes. So let me pull up your slides, Mark, and you can begin.
Well, Bob started his presentation with a picture of his family. I guess I've got a picture of my dog, so that kind of tells you where my operation is. I'm Mark Peterson. My wife, Melanie, and I farm in southwest Iowa, close to Stanton. We have row crop about 400 acres this year, between 300 and 400 acres. Small by today's standards. I guess I'm trying to farm perhaps deep rather than wide. This is my consulting crew in the Ranger. The yellow lab is Emmy and the black lab is Riley, and there isn't too much that goes on out there that they aren't involved in. Anyway, for what that's worth. Last fall, a year ago now, was my first time with cover crops. So we are starting on our second season now. We put out just an experimental mix the 7th of August in conjunction with a field day that was held at my place a year ago, just to see what would or wouldn't grow. Really wasn't all that successful, but my actual cover crops were started. The first was done with this helicopter on or about the 13th of August September of last year. We were real fortunate that day, about 4 hours after we got done putting out straight cereal rye and then a little cereal rye with some crimson clover mixed in. About 4 hours after that, we got a good inch of rain, so you couldn't ask for it much better than that as far as putting out your cover crop by an aerial seeding method to get a rain that quick. So that was the first method that we put cover crops out. That was cereal rye but cereal rye by itself, and then cereal rye with crimson clover. Both the crimson clover only went into some soybean ground that was going to be corn this year. but I did put straight cereal rye by itself out in both corn ground and bean ground. So it's in both this year. The second method of application, this is a standard 15-inch Kinsey planter with a special disc in it that allowed us to put annual ryegrass and radishes out in a mix using just the planter boxes and this special mix. We were able to use a planter, and obviously this was after harvest. This was about the 1st of October. Harvest was early this last year, thanks to our wonderful August that we had. So we were able to get out there quicker than normal. So this was annual rye and radish mix. Then our third and final method, we did use it happened to be a small one because that's what was available to me, a small no-till drill. And once again, I was back to cereal rye and cereal rye with crimson clover. I put this out in strips next to where we had gone in with the helicopter. This particular piece of ground is pretty flat, so there shouldn't be much yield variability across it. And I put it out in strips with the idea that this fall now we are going to harvest that in the strips with a yield monitor so we can see if there is any difference between cover crop and no cover crop as far as yield for corn. Now I'm going to tell you right now, stick with me to the end because we did add a slide from this morning in there just now, and I've received, I consider, while I'm not from South Carolina and I didn't win the lottery, I think I got an early Christmas present this morning, so stay with me to the end here and give you some fresh news. Anyway, this was the third method of seeding, was the cereal rye with some crimson clover mixed in. This was about the 3rd of October. The interesting thing is, right about where the tractor was parked is where some of the heliseeding had been done with crimson clover, and on the day that I was out there with the drill, you could see the crimson clover growing, and I was really excited about that. I was hoping that the crimson clover would provide some of the nitrogen for this year's corn crop. However, the next 2 days after I was out there with the drill, we had a really light frost in the mornings. It was not a heavy frost at all. It was really light, and the crimson clover didn't make it. I never saw it again, and I did not see any of it in conjunction with the drill. So at this point, I'm not real excited about crimson clover. However, I did go to a meeting out in Indiana, and they suggested, rather than straight cereal rye, maybe we need to consider a cereal rye oats crimson clover mix, with the idea that the oats grow faster in the fall and will provide a quicker cover for that crimson clover, maybe allowing it to maintain later into the season. I see a question here on the Kinsey planter, did you mix the ryegrass? It was a ryegrass radish mix, actually, and it was the mix in each box. There really wasn't any challenges with it. We were able to plant them just fine, as near as we could tell. You know, it seemed to distribute it just fine. I really don't have any regret with it at all. I was not all that excited with the ryegrass and radish mix in general. When it was all said and done, I guess the reason I went with so many different mixes and so many different methods, it was my first year into cover crops. I was not sure what was going to work. I'd done enough research that I knew something was going to work. I just didn't know what was going to work. I guess I had my aha moment a couple of years ago in the spring. We had one of our what now seem to be becoming more common gully washers, where even the flat ground washes, and I just drew the line in the sand and said something has to change. We have terraces on our farm, we have waterways on our farm, we contour plant, we no-till. We're still losing ground, and we can't afford to lose the ground at the rate we are. You know, I am a shrimp hugger, and what I mean by that, I want to keep my soil and my nutrients on my farm, and if I do, that means they're not going to the Gulf, and if they don't go to the Gulf, that means that they have better shrimp farming down there. So therefore, I am now a self-proclaimed shrimp hugger. This is some of the cereal rye. This was about the 1st of April. There's probably folks out here familiar with Practical Farmers. Just in case you're wondering, Mark Strobe has been known to work on occasion. He was out there that day taking the biomass samples out of some of the crimson clover out on that bottom field, where not too far from where the drill was parked in the picture before. So this is, as I say, it was around the 1st of April, as I remember. We're going to look at a couple pictures of this progressing. This happens to be my granddaughter, Addie. This is kind of in that same area. This is the cereal rye on about the 28th of April. It was 5 days after it had been terminated. You can tell there where her fingers are. There's beginning to become brown on the cereal rye, the mix that we use for chemicals, and please don't ask me what it is because I can't tell you right offhand. My oldest son is a custom applicator, and he made up the mix. It was kind of interesting. When I started into cover crops, I told Matt what I was going to do, and he says, now wait a minute, let me get this straight, Dad. You mean to tell me you're going to plant something in the fall and then you expect me to kill it in the spring? And I said, yeah, that's right. Well, it worked out and everything was fine, but there was definitely some questions going in, shall we say. This is the cereal rye. This was heliseeded cereal rye. This is about the middle of May, as I remember. And at this time, well, actually earlier than this, but we had made the decision. This was seeded with a helicopter at about 1 bushel per acre. And it had taken so well that, listening to Sarah Carlson, I decided to save part of it to harvest for seed this year. And this was part of what we ended up saving for seed. And as you can see, it's starting to do very well. Looking at all the green out there, one thing I'll mention, it's not a benefit that you can put any monetary value on, but through the winter, being able to look outside of the house and see a green and growing crop in December, it's hard to put a financial value on that. It sure is fun to see something growing in the wintertime. Is there a reason I chose helicopter over a plane? The helicopter is available local to us. We have one flying out of the airport in Red Oak, which is very close. Our ground is contoured. It's hilly. We have trees, a little bit of everything. I'm sure not saying that an airplane can't do it. I wanted to try the helicopter and see what I felt about it. I've been pretty pleased with what I've seen from Johnson Helicopter Service out of Red Oak on that. I'm sure not discounting a plane. I kind of had planned on using a plane last year to compare it to the helicopter, and we did not get it done. This year, just to kind of throw in there, I guess now, for lack of any better time, we have put out in the neighborhood of 2/3 of our ground. Basically, any ground that has a slope on it has cereal rye put on with a helicopter. Coming up on 2 weeks ago, it was some of our own seed that we had saved from last year, from this that she's standing in out here. So the yield on the cereal rye when it was combined was between 35 and 40 an acre, and so it was going to be soybeans. You know, I raised 35 to 40 bushel cereal rye, didn't have to put any more money into the crop, and probably came out with as much bottom line. Actually, I've made the comment, as it's been dry, that may have been the best beans that I did not raise this year. I wonder if I won't end up with a better net return on those acres than what I do on the soybeans with the dryness that we've had. I guess we kind of got two pictures here together. On the right, that is the line between the terminated cereal rye and the still living cereal rye that was saved for seed. There was some areas, since we didn't plan on it being a seed crop, that it maybe wasn't as uniform as what it could have been, so we terminated part and saved part. Now, the interesting thing was, it was mentioned earlier, can you plant beans into live cover? Well, my line that the sprayer drew and the line that I drew with the planter didn't always actually equally overlap, and I ended up planting some into the living rye. And what was really interesting, when we went out and combined this rye in mid-July when it was mature, in underneath the living rye for a few feet from where I had started my overlap were living soybeans. And those soybeans were as tall as the beans that were out in the terminated cereal rye. Can you plant beans into a living cover crop? What I want to know is, can you plant beans into a living cover crop, harvest the cover crop, and then harvest the beans? Might be something to consider in the future. The other side, that's just a shot of planter going into the terminated cereal rye. I happen to I'm super old school, well, maybe not even old school, I'm just plain frugal, tight, whatever. I'm planting 38-inch rows, so that's a 38-inch row planter. If you'll notice, you can just see that there's a dry fertilizer box on the front of it. We are splitting up our nitrogen applications. I'm trying to keep my nitrogen as close to the time of year that the corn needs it as possible. We're putting on 30 pounds of nitrogen in with the first pass of chemicals. I'm putting on about 60 pounds of actual nitrogen with the planter in a 2x3 band. And then this year, that same helicopter and that same application basket that you saw in the early picture, we did fly on anywhere from 50 to 80 pounds of nitrogen into the corn about a week and a half, 2 weeks prior to tasseling. This year it was close to the 1st of July, hoping that by timing our nitrogen applications closer to when the plant needs it, maybe we can get by with less total pounds of nitrogen. Margaret, I see you've got a question. I'm not sure if that was before or after I answered. My rye yield on what I harvested was between 35 and 40 bushel to the acre. This is a standard 6-row, 11-row, 15-inch split Kinsey planter. This is going into the rye that we had terminated. As I remember, it was about 4 days prior to planting. So this was in the process. Maybe it was a little sooner than that. I don't remember exactly how many days it had died. Is it a problem planting into it? No. Did I really make any special adjustments to the planter? I'm all no-till anyway. I really didn't make any special adjustments onto the planter to plant into this. I found it easy as far as planting to plant into it. Seeing your mark is quite exciting, but where you're planting 15-inch beans, if you overlap a little bit, I guess so be it. But that's the only downfall. I'm not using GPS on the planter, on the tractor, so I have to figure out where I'm at with markers, and markers aren't a lot of help planting into that. There's another shot of it. You, of course, as you're going through the field, you can see your 15-inch strips where you've been with the planter before, so you can kind of tell from that standpoint. But as far as seeing an actual mark, it is kind of a waste of time. Okay, here we are at the grand finale. These 6 ears were taken out of that bottom field just this morning by my agronomist, who works for the local co-op. I would like to think that he was non-biased. He brought these 6 ears up to me unsolicited. It wasn't planned for this presentation or anything, but just happened to be out here this morning. He brought up these 6 ears. They were still in the husk. He had randomly pulled 3 from the no cover crops area and 3 from the cover crops area. Now this was cereal rye only, and on average, the 3 from the cover crop area are 3/4 of an inch longer than the ones that came from the no cover crop area. One of the no cover crop area ears has 14 rows around. The other two have 16. On the cover crop area, all three of those ears have 16 rows around. Is it scientific? Absolutely not. As I said earlier on, we will be working with a yield monitor this fall out in that field to see if there is anything as far as a yield difference goes. Based on what I'm seeing on this morning, I felt like I got to unwrap an early Christmas present. I think we are going to see a yield increase on the side. I'd take any of those 6 years, especially the way this year has been. But I'm really happy to see that the ears that are coming out of the cereal rye area are slightly bigger than the other ones. It's the same variety, same field, side by side. I've been really pleased with that. So I guess with that, that's my presentation. I've probably talked plenty long anyway. We'll see what we've got for any other questions here. I'm not sure, Margaret, if he did do stand counts. I can't tell you if there was any difference between those two. If I had put more pictures in, I do have other photos taken through the spring. I could not see any stand difference between cereal rye and no cereal rye. I'll ask Stephen about that and see, and maybe try and follow up on that, but I'm not aware of any stand difference at all. How long have I been no-till? A long time. I honestly can't tell you how many years now. Basically, probably 20 years is a guess. How does one become a shrimp hugger? Well, I'm self-proclaimed, so that means I decided myself that I was going to be a shrimp hugger. The big show guys were talking about the picture today on the noon show. Wow! I guess I made it there quick. I did email that picture out prior to this webinar today. I'll have to admit I was pretty excited about it, and I told them there, I hope they said it, you know, it's not scientific, but it sure is interesting looking.
All right, what do you think, Mark? Should we switch it over to Tom?
Absolutely, unless anybody, do we have any other questions? Or I've been trying to answer them as we go along, but I see another one probably coming here. The rye yield. My rye yield was between 35 and 40 bushel to the acre on what we harvested for seed this summer.
We will have 20 minutes for questions.
Just we'll switch over, Luke, I guess.
Please keep your questions coming. Put them in the chat. We'll have all these folks for questions for 20 minutes at the end. Tom Casper, joining me on my left. You can begin whenever you're ready.
Well, hi, everybody. It won't be as exciting as the previous two presentations, and a lot of you have probably heard me talk at one time or another. Anyway, I'm in Ames here at the National Lab for Ag and the Environment, which used to be the Soil Tilth Lab. Worked with cover crops since the early 90s. We have done most of our work with cereal rye and oats. Not because the other cover crops are bad or whatever, but when we first started, those were the two that we could consistently get to grow and were good for the kind of experiments that I was working with. And I just throw this slide up to just talk a little bit about why are we growing cover crops? Well, it's mainly to keep green plants out there all year round. And in Iowa, we're talking mostly about a corn and soybean rotation, unless we have a situation like this summer where we have prevented planting. But when we don't have plants on the landscape, and with corn and soybeans, we have, depending on how you figure it, 5 to 7 months without living plants. We lose nitrogen, phosphorus, soil organic matter, and topsoil. And we're continuing to learn about what's happening to things like earthworms and soil biology or microbiology, the microbes in our soil when we have that 7-month gap. This is just sort of a list of things that some of the benefits from keeping that gap closed with living plants. We're going to reduce erosion. We're going to recycle nutrients, increase soil organic matter, improve weed control, support and maintain soil organisms, improve soil structure. We have some grazing or forage potential with cover crops, and it's a long-term investment in soil health. This is a picture that was sent to me by a farmer in Washington County, Steve Berger. It's a picture of his farm, which is the green field on the top, and one of his neighbors. But this occurred in early April after a intensive 3.5-inch rain overnight. The rain actually came within a few hours, and this picture was from Google Earth, and I'm not sure exactly how Steve got it, but and what we're seeing in there are the rills in his neighbor's field, and I can tell from the picture that he's also in no-till. He has waterways, so he had undisturbed residue there, and in spite of that, the rain came hard enough and fast enough that he still had some rills develop in his field. Whereas up in the field to the top of the picture, you can see terraces and the cereal rye cover crop, and at least from the satellite, no visible rills. So a lot of farmers, especially out in western Iowa in the Luss Hills and northeastern Iowa, I'm hearing the interest in cover crops is increasing because of these intensive rainfall events and trying to stop these rills from forming. Another reason farmers grow cover crops is what the cover crops are doing for soil structure, especially in no-till. I like this picture because it shows the aggregates that are developing. It also shows an earthworm hole, increased earthworm populations, which are also going to help with aeration and soil structure in a no-till situation. I mentioned a little earlier that cover crops are a long-term investment in soil health, and this slide talks a little bit about some research where we've had a field with cover crops for over 10 years. And during that time, we've measured a 10% increase in soil organic matter in the top 4 inches, and that would be about a 0.5% change in soil organic matter in the way that we usually think about that. If you do some very rough estimate, a 0.5% change in soil organic matter would result in an additional 1/2 inch of available water, or about 10 pounds per acre of mineralized soil N. We also did measurements in the lab of potential nitrogen mineralization, and basically we came up with roughly that same estimate of about 10 pounds of acre of mineralized N that would probably be available each year. Now, that's after 10 years of cover crops. It's a slow process. Part of it is because we have trouble measuring those kind of changes, but it's certainly headed in the right direction. Another reason that we grow cover crops, again, especially in no-till, is because of rooting depth or keeping root channels open. This picture is from a field day in the fall. The plant, you can just see a little bit of green at the top, is cereal rye, and the farmer is showing that the roots are already down 29 inches in the fall. In our research plots, when we've measured in April, over a 5-year period, we saw on average about 38 inches of rooting depth with cereal rye. So that rye is keeping those root channels open down to the 38-inch depth. And that can help in soils that have compacted layers or in soils that are otherwise restrictive to rooting depth. Talk a little bit about possible cover crops for Iowa. I'm mainly talking about fall planted cover crops, but obviously these same plants or species would be applicable for summer planting or prevented planting acres. Small grains, that's mainly what I've used. The brassicas, which are radishes, turnips, mustard, canola, rapeseed are some other ones. Forage grasses like annual ryegrass, which is of course different than cereal rye. Legumes like hairy vetch, red clover, crimson clover, and then a host of others like sorghum, Sudan grass, buckwheat, millet. We haven't talked much about mixtures. Some of the farmers earlier have been using mixtures or talked about planting mixtures. We haven't done a lot of research about mixtures. And in general, we don't have much experience in Iowa with a lot of these cover crop species. Sarah Carlson and some of the members of PFI have been doing some trials with, I believe it's 20 different cover crops. And that's really good information in terms of which of these cover crops will grow in different parts of Iowa, will grow enough to cause a difference or make a difference, and which of those will overwinter in Iowa. For instance, like annual ryegrass, we're not sure how well it overwinters, or at least the new varieties. And some of the overwintering of any of these things depends on how early it gets planted. In other words, if you planted annual ryegrass into a open field in August, it's going to survive the winter a lot better than if you aerial seeded into standing corn in the first part of October. So a lot of these things we're gaining experience with, and we're going to have to learn how to use some of these other species. One of the tools that's been developed to help cover crop selection and to talk about possible seeding dates is the cover crop decision tool, which is on the Midwest Cover Crops Council website. Sarah was involved in this, I was involved in this, and we tried to look at different cover crop species and determine what would be the planting dates that would allow reliable establishment. This was based on the best guesses of people in Iowa. Like I said, we don't have a lot of experience with some of these cover crops, and we're thinking about them in terms of planting them into a corn and soybean rotation. Of course, into open ground or other crops that mature earlier, they're a lot easier to do. But this is something to look at. You can go in there and designate your county in Iowa, and the bar graph changes depending on where you are in Iowa. I guess I just want to talk a little bit about in general, that if you're going to put cover crops into your system and not change anything else, they're probably not going to grow very well. They're not just an add-on. You have to change your timing and management and logistics in order to get them planted and also to terminate them in the spring. They have different potential benefits and challenges for each species, and it also depends on your main crop rotation. For instance, cover crops are going to be more difficult in probably continuous corn than a corn-soybean rotation. They would be easy following a small grain like people in South Dakota or Kansas or Nebraska sometimes talk about. And that's one of the things to consider when you look at information on the web about cover crops, is what type of crop rotation are they planting them in. Something that works for somebody in South Dakota following wheat is not probably going to work as well following corn harvest in Iowa. As I said, you need to adapt your cropping system to accommodate the cover crop and think about how everything fits together, because the main thing we're after is getting enough cover crop growth to make a difference. This is just some data that we collected over 3 years with cereal rye with different planting dates in the fall in Ames, Iowa. And basically what this graph is showing is that in order to get good cover crop growth, we basically have to get it planted by the 1st of November in Ames. And these were all planted after corn or soybean harvest, drilled into the ground, not aerial seeded. We have planted cereal rye as late as December 15th. That's the farthest green point. It will come up in the spring, but the stand is reduced and we don't have a lot of growth. Other cover crop species are going to have to be planted much earlier than cereal rye does. Cereal rye is the most winter hardy and frost tolerant cover crop that we have. So things like radishes, we are already probably at the point where planting radishes, even drilling radishes into harvested ground, they are not going to grow a whole lot at this point. I'm not saying I know all the answers to that, but that would be my guess based on what I've seen so far. So, and it depends, of course, in southern Iowa, that's different, and it would depend on what the weather is this year going forward. Talk a little bit about planting methods. I see that I have a picture that didn't come up on this computer for some reason, but the best way to plant cover crops is to drill after harvest. The other picture was showing an air seeder on a harrow or air seeder with any sort of shallow tillage. Getting the seed into the ground is obviously the best way to do it. The problem with that is that if we wait until after harvest to drill or plant our cover crop, it often limits which cover crop we can plant, and it's not going to grow as much if we get very late into the season. Oh, there's the other picture. Well, let's see. What are the chemical concerns for spring applications? Atrazine. I'm assuming that you mean residual effects of herbicides that were applied in the spring. And we actually don't know a whole lot about that. None of the chemicals or none of the chemical companies have done any ratings or considered cover crop plantings in terms of their label descriptions. I know at several of the cover crop conferences that I've been at over the years that that's been a point of discussion. It depends on the year, as it does every year. If it tends to be dry and cooler, you're going to have more carryover than if it's been wet and warm. So, yes, there are concerns. Atrazine is one that we've tried to avoid when we planted cover crops, but I don't really have any hard information on that. That's going to be something that we have to continue to look at and collect information on going forward. Anyway, my picture of the harrow did come up. I had to just click it again. And then we've already heard talk about aerial seeding or broadcast seeding with a helicopter. It obviously can also be done with a plane. There are some new high clearance vehicles that are being developed, or even farmer designed or put together high clearance applicators. The problem, of course, with aerial or broadcast seeding is we're putting that seed on the soil surface without any incorporation, and obviously you need rain. Some species, cover crops, germinate better under those circumstances than others. I guess my personal experience is that cereal rye or wheat does better than oats. I don't have a great reason for that occurring, but it seems to have happened year after year. This is also a way, though, to get your cover crop on earlier for things like the radishes or the legumes, to give them more time to grow. Unfortunately, depending on the canopy, they're not going to grow as well with a drying corn canopy or soybean canopy as they would in an open field. And some cover crops are going to be damaged during harvest. I've had situations where I've seeded legumes, had good germination, a lot of plants, and then after I dumped the residue from 200 bushel corn on top of them, they just don't do very well or grow through that very well, whereas cereal rye will grow up through the residue pretty well. Also, of course, the wheel traffic from harvest will damage some species more than others. But here again, this is something we're learning more about as we go on, and we'll have to continue to do research on that. Managing cover crops in the spring. Obviously, only cover crops that are winter hardy and live through the winter need to be killed in the spring with herbicide or tillage. It's a good idea to watch soil, water, rainfall, and cover crop growth. In other words, if we're having a dry spring, then you might want to consider killing your cover crop earlier than if we're having a wet spring. We usually like to kill grass cover crops like cereal rye or winter wheat 14 days prior to planting or before the cover crop is 6 to 8 inches tall when we're going into corn. Ahead of soybeans, that's not a big concern. And as we've discussed, soybeans can even be planted into standing cereal rye and then sprayed later. That's not something I guess I would recommend as a matter of course for farmers on all their acres, but I know there's been research in Minnesota where they've done that and been pretty successful with it. We still have something to learn about that, I think. And as we've mentioned before, we have to pay attention to what the crop insurance regulations are, especially with regard to termination dates. There are more than one way to terminate a cover crop in the spring. Herbicides, we have, or at least in our research, have always used glyphosate. It very easily can be used to kill cereal rye or winter wheat. Annual ryegrass is a little bit harder to kill with glyphosate. Obviously, any of the broadleaf cover crop species that survive the winter can be killed with glyphosate or even 2,4-D if you're going to corn. Tillage can be used to kill the cover crops. Obviously, that's weather dependent. If there's a lot of rainfall, it can take more than one pass. The small grain cover crops and some of the other ones that head out can be killed by rolling or mowing, but they have to be, you have to wait until the seeds are beginning to develop and the plants have completely headed out. Here again, you'd have to wait until the middle of May or later. That's usually later than desirable for corn planting, and it's probably not covered by crop insurance in most situations. I show this because this is a pretty common item for farmers that have been using cover crops for a long time and have encountered wet conditions in the spring. If they have a lot of acres and it's wet, they want to be able to get out there and spray that without going to large equipment that's going to cause compaction or waiting for the co-op to do it. I think we've got a great untapped potential with cover crop. As I said, we don't know a lot about all the possible species that we could be using for cover crops. We don't know a lot about mixtures. I think eventually we're going to start doing plant breeding for cover crops, and that could open up a whole new windows of opportunity. We should find varieties that are better adapted, grow faster, winter hardy, and are easier to terminate. I think cover crop mixtures are eventually what we're all going to be using, but we're still learning about that. I think we need more research and on-farm trials looking at cover crops, and we need more buy-in from agribusiness in terms of seed, products, machinery, services, and consulting. And just to show you the Midwest Cover Crops website, which is another source of information in addition to Practical Farmers of Iowa.
Cool. Thank you, Tom. All right, we got 25 minutes for your questions, folks. So we've got two farmers and Tom Casper. What do you want to know about cover crops?
There's a question, are we looking at planting cover crops earlier in the growing season to get more growth and benefit? I haven't done a lot with that. I've just done some very small attempts where we've tried to plant different cover crop species as early as the middle of July and the 1st of August, the middle of August. And it really depends, you know, maybe I'm not doing it right, and it really depends on the given year. You know, obviously if it's a summer where we have quite a bit of rainfall, cover crops can germinate and survive under a corn canopy. They have more difficulty surviving under the bean canopy because it just tends to be so much thicker. There's definitely a sweet spot in terms of timing. I guess I kind of concluded that you probably don't want to go much earlier than the middle of August for a lot of these species, just because they don't, either the main crop is using so much water that it kills the cover crop, or the main crop is shading the cover crop so much that they don't grow very well. So I think we have more to learn about that, but just by going earlier doesn't solve all of our problems. Usually when we talk about aerial seeding or broadcast seeding, and some of the people that have been doing it in Indiana and a longer time than I have would say that you want to wait till you just begin to get leaf yellowing, or corn is just about at black layer. If you can predict when that's happened, you can maybe cheat ahead 7 to 10 days if you're getting good rainfall. But it's kind of a trying to find that fruit pot and the main crop is going to take root and start to let more light into the soil. Have we looked at shorter season corn and soybean varieties to allow for more cover crop growth and development in the fall? Not really. I guess I'm doing that for the first time this year for an experiment where we wanted to get winter canola planted early to use it as a cover crop, and so we planted some very early maturity soybeans, which we've harvested now and have drilled in the canola. So, but that's my only experience with it. Has there been a problem with damaging legumes in a standing crop of soybeans with harvesting equipment? I have planted legumes into soybeans as well as into standing corn, just on a very small scale. One of the legumes that does pretty well in that situation is hairy vetch. I haven't had as much luck with red clover or alfalfa just because they've been smaller. The wheel traffic is when they've only got 2 or 3 leaves, is pretty hard on the small legume plants. Obviously, you're not putting as much residue on them as you do with corn. I think the reason the hairy vetch does better is because it tends to be more of a viney plant and it sort of grows up through the residue. Somebody asked about planting winter pea this year after soybean. Is there anything to look for? I have only done winter pea once or twice and not been very successful. I know Sarah has been more successful with that in some of the different locations that she's planted at, and she might be able to comment on that better than I can. Is there a nutrient credit for radishes? I know some of the people at Purdue are looking at nutrient uptake of radishes. Nutrient credits are kind of well, I have a hard time dealing with them because they're going to be so variable from year to year, and they're kind of an engineering estimate of what is going to be available the next year. I prefer to look at that more in terms of the long-term recycling of nitrogen.
This is Bob here. I guess what I would interpret that question to be is how much do the radishes take out of your field to produce for next year? Is it the same as maybe having a full soybean crop and 50 bushel beans and having a credit of 50 nitrogen for next year? Did you answer that that way?
Yeah, that's the way I interpreted it too. And yeah, I don't know anything about that. I know people are looking at that, but I don't know what it is. It depends, all of these things, all of these benefits depend on how well they grow. If your radishes don't grow very much, you're not going to have much of a recycling of nitrogen in that year. If you're getting the big radishes that they have in southern Indiana or southern Illinois, maybe you're going to be getting enough nitrogen back in that next summer to reduce your fertilizer.
We're waiting for some questions, so if you have some more, please feel free to type them in.
Yeah, Sarah responded that there's a recent PhD from Minnesota that was looking at radishes, and that there, at least in some springs, is a problem that they release their nutrients too quickly, and that they leach away before the corn crop gets there. I believe that study were radishes planted after wheat harvest or an early harvested crop. When is a good time to terminate cereal rye? Well, at least here in central Iowa, I'm looking at sometime around between the 10th and the 20th of April. So it somewhat depends on how much growth I have and when you're planning to plant your corn, if that's what's following. If you're planting soybeans, I generally let them grow later, maybe even till the last week of April, depending on when I'm going to plant my beans. Let's see, I'm trying to remember last spring which planting was hit or miss. I think we terminated our rye and then we couldn't get back into the field for a considerable time after that. So, and I think it was around somewhere between the 15th and the 20th before corn.
Tom, this is Mark. Don't they kind of recommend close to 3 weeks for cereal rye, if possible, before corn?
I would say at least 2 weeks, but yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I think I had 19 days or so from termination to planting this year. I was a little worried. I like to plant early, and that didn't happen this year with the weather conditions that we had. And it worked out fine. I have been told by various sources that if you would happen to be putting starter fertilizer, particularly nitrogen, on with your planter, you're setting yourself up for a better chance of success by having that fertilizer there readily available for that young corn plant. Now, we've done some leaf nutrient tests out in my cereal rye strips, and the first test came back with less nitrogen in the leaf where the cereal rye was and where it was not. But the second leaf test, which was just prior to tasseling, at that time, and it wasn't a big difference, but there was slightly more nitrogen in the corn leaf where we had the cereal rye than where there wasn't.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I guess I've been using starter with no-till even before I used cover crops, so we sort of carried that over into planting into cover crops. So I certainly agree with that. I think a starter helps, especially if you're planting corn into cereal rye. And yeah, I know Steve Berger, and of course he's a little bit farther south. Well, he's probably on the same latitude as you are in Stanton, but he's looking to kill his cover crop anytime after the 1st of April. But Steve gets really good growth because he uses manure, and so they grow faster too. And it sort of depends on how much they're growing. If they're not growing very much, it's probably less of a concern. But we've got some other question. Do radishes really have a bad odor when they're decomposing? I've never smelled it myself, but that's what I hear.
I've heard anecdotal evidence or reports that 911 has been called on occasion for a gas leak. So yeah. Evidently the smell can be pretty bad.
The smell can be pretty bad. I think there's even been a lawsuit about it in one of the either Indiana or Illinois,
Like a nuisance lawsuit?
a nuisance lawsuit. Yeah.
There's a question on here, has some radishes that went to seed this fall. The concern is the seeds germinate in the spring and cause some issues. It depends on your practices of how you farm, I guess. You know, if you're going to use some type of burn down or chemicals in the spring to control your weeds and your crops growing, I don't think it'd be a problem. If you're not and you're not using chemicals, then it may be somewhat of a concern if they start growing again.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's just something to be aware of. It's also part of what people in the cover crop area talk as the radish wars. The whole business about having a small percentage of your radish plants go to seed, that means that there's probably some impurity in the seed, or they're not all the same genotype or cultivar, whatever you want to call it. And the people that sell radish seed, and now there are 4 or 5, maybe even more different groups selling those seeds, all claim, well, our seed is better than theirs because it's purer, and that's part of what they're talking about. Is you don't want it to head out too early. Both from the seed standpoint and also from the then it's not going to grow as well or grow as fast if it's heading out. Anyone have experience with seeding with a highboy? Cost for a used unit and retrofitting? Are commercial applicators gearing up to provide this service? I can't answer those first 2 questions. I know people have done it. I know that machinery manufacturers are gearing up to provide machines, and their hope is to sell it to co-ops and people that would provide that service.
Not to throw names, but I'm from up in north central Iowa, and Hagee up there has been working on that. They have had several retrofits out there in the fields trying them yet this fall even to make sure they go. And yes, there are several Practical Farmer of Iowa people that have gone out and made their own machines and used the highboys to put cover crops out there.
There's a question. Howard Buffett's roller crimper was on display at the Farm Progress Show. How do you feel about non-chemical termination of cover crops? I'm fine. It's just a matter of adapting your system to do it that way. It takes a different timing and management, but I know some people have shown that soybeans can do very well after roller crimped cereal rye or winter wheat. So there's, it's just a matter of being able to manage your system to do that. And it says, so do I firmly believe that it may be too late to plant radishes? I wouldn't put a firmly believe in front of it, but that would be my guess. To be honest, I just have not worked enough with radishes to know. As I said, we just planted winter canola last Friday into a harvested soybean field, so I'm hoping that they grow, and radishes would be reasonably similar to those. If we have a later than normal fall, they would do fine. I know last year I had some radishes out that were killed by a frost we had on October 6th. So they did regrow. I shouldn't say they were killed. They were burned back. They did regrow some after that. But yeah, it's just that, let's just say the probability, we're getting to the point where the probability is getting lower that they're going to grow very much, and it all depends on where you are in Iowa. If you're in southern Iowa, you probably have 2 weeks more than we have even in central Iowa. So.
We do have about 5 minutes left. If folks have questions, we also have an NRCS and an RMA person. NRCS stands for Natural Resource Conservation Service, and RMA stands for the Risk Management Agency. So if you have questions about crop insurance and cover crops, if you have questions about NRCS programs to promote cover crops, let us know and we can bring those people in.
I guess since we've got a lull here, this is Mark again. For those in southwest Iowa in particular, I am one of the people this year that has the various cover crop species in a test plot for Practical Farmers of Iowa. We have 18 different varieties and mixes in 2 replications, both in soybeans and in corn. They're on an area of my farm, our farm, that's close to the road and close to each other. We will at some point in November be having a field day out there, but I'm kind of hoping also to get, once they come up, we will hopefully put some stakes out there so they can be kind of a self-guided tour. If somebody wants to stop by and take a look, they're sure welcome to.
Mark, when did you put those out?
They were put out a week ago Tuesday, so we have had a good, strong 1.5 inches of rain since that time, so I'm really optimistic about giving them a great start. And all of our cereal rye went on a week ago Sunday, so while I'm not all that optimistic in general on the regular row crop, the cover crop prospects for this fall are looking pretty good. If they don't come up this fall, I don't know when they would.
How far along are your corn and soybean at this point?
When we applied these cover crops a week ago, Tuesday or Wednesday, whatever it was, I'd have to look back now, but at that time you could just barely start to see yellow leaf out in the soybeans. We're planting, I think it's a 3.2 or thereabouts for maturity for our soybeans, and the corn was just starting into maturity at that point. I think for our location it was probably about the right timing. According to what Practical Farmers wanted, it maybe should have been a little earlier than that, but I think for us this far south it was the right timing.
Yeah, sounds like it.
While we're waiting for additional questions, just wanted to thank everybody for joining us. This has been our largest attended, most people attended Farminar yet, and so thank you very much for being part of this this event.
Yeah, reading some of this here, if you're new to cover crops and you're farming, take the easy road, or if you want to start out without too much risk, throw some cereal rye out and soybeans, put some oats out. Oats, yeah, they're going to winter kill, but it's something that at least you're getting something out there to try. But I'm a firm believer, well, I know it's not the cure-all, cereal rye will grow under most any conditions, and particularly if it's ground that is going into soybeans, I don't think you've got much to worry about there. I personally am not worried about it at all going into a corn situation after what I've seen this year, but time will tell. Maybe as things mature, we'll see other things happen, but this was a pretty rough spring to deal with, cold, wet, snow, whatever, so I'm comfortable in trying it again.
Very well. Thank you very much, folks. We'll be sending an email out to all those who put your email in the chat box, and we would love to have your feedback on how this went, and want to just say a thank you to our farmers, Bob and Mark and Tom here from Ames. Thank you all for joining us, and let us know how we can help you in the future, and guide our future online seminars. Oh, that's right. And if you're looking for the CEUs, please put your number in. Make sure your number and your name is in the chat box, and we'll make sure you guys get that 1.5 credit hours. Have a great weekend, everybody.